So as you can see, this unit's vacant. Our tenants just moved out of here. Going through the unit, making sure everything looks good before we turn it over. But the topic of this video and what I really wanted to get into was the top 10 tips for first-time landlords and owning and renting your first investment property. Before we get into it, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell notification. Let's jump into tip number 1. So tip number 1, and these are in no particular order of importance, but tip number 1 is understanding your market. You want to understand the market you're investing in. Before you just jump in and start investing, you want to know what streets are good, what streets are bad. Is it A class, B class, or C class neighborhood? Making sure that you understand the type of tenant that you're going to get in that particular market is super important. Also understanding crime statistics, amenities such as proximity to public transportation, proximity to schools, proximity to potential jobs or employers. You want to make sure you do all of your due diligence on the neighborhood or the market that you plan on investing in before you just jump in and invest. Tip number 2. Underwriting the deal. Underwriting the deal is probably, in my opinion, the most important aspect of investing. I actually did a video about underwriting a potential investment property, and I'll link to that above. But making sure that you underwrite the deal correctly and conservatively can significantly benefit you in the future. It could save you from a bad deal. It could save you from a deal that won't cash flow. So making sure you underwrite the deal, making sure that you account for proper CapEx. If you're going into a potential investment property and it requires renovation, making sure you know how much that renovation is actually going to cost instead of just estimating. Bring a contractor with you, or make sure you document everything that needs to get done to that property before, and then bring it to a couple potential contractors to get bids on and estimates on. Or ask another fellow investor, in their experience, what have they spent on renovating specific aspects of a rental property. In addition to making sure that you budget for the right amount of CapEx, you want to make sure that you're budgeting for the right amount of operating costs. Making sure that you are accounting for all the costs associated to run a property is super important. That includes things like property taxes, water bills if the tenant isn't paying for it, landscaping, snow removal, etc., etc., etc. You want to make sure that you have a detailed and conservative numbers associated with each line item in terms of operating expenses. The other thing you want to make sure you account for is vacancy. You may think that you're never going to be vacant and your property is never going to be empty, but you never know. Turnover occurs. You may have to do some work to the unit during turnover like we do here, and you may be vacant for a month or two. You need to account for a vacancy loss when you're underwriting a potential deal. Tip number 3, screening tenants. Screening tenants is probably the second most important thing when it comes to owning a rental property or investment property. You want to know who's going to be moving into your place. You want to know that they're not going to destroy the place. You want to get a good read on the tenant. Making sure that you screen the tenant appropriately is very important. We have a detailed application package that any prospective tenant needs to fill out. We also provide background checks, we do credit checks, we do employment verification, we make sure they provide pay stubs that we verify. Making sure that you do all of those things will ensure that a tenant can A, pay the rent, and B, potentially keep your place clean and make sure that your place doesn't get destroyed. Certain states have landlord-tenant laws that you want to make sure that you pay attention to or are aware of. So make sure that you research those for your specific state and you're following those specific guidelines, making sure that you understand what you can and can't do during the screening process. Let's jump outside. I gotta check out the deck, make sure that that's looking good, and we'll get into tip number 4. Tip number 4, maximize your investment potential. You want to make sure that you're getting the most rent you possibly can for a unit. Any upgrades that you can do or any capex that you can do to maximize your rental potential is huge. The two biggest things, kitchens and baths. Kitchens and baths are the most important things you can do and upgrade to maximize your rental potential. For instance, we did this deck last year, this roof deck last year, which increased the value of the unit, increased the amount of rent we could get. So you want to make sure that you're maximizing your rental potential in the unit you're in. You could be undercharging based on your location or based on the market. So research the market, see what an upgraded unit can rent for versus what you're getting for rent, and see if that increased capex makes sense. You want to try to get a 2-year return on investment for any capex that you do. So running those numbers and making sure that you're maximizing your rental potential is important. Tip number 5, create a solid lease. Don't just go online and download any free lease from the internet. You want to create a solid lease that has provisions in it specific to your state and your state's tenant landlord laws. You want to have an addendum specific to the building or specific to the unit, making sure that you're detailing certain rules and regulations that you want your tenants to follow. Make sure that you have an attorney review your lease. Make sure that your lease is solid, make sure that it's locked down, and that way you'll be protected, your tenant will be protected, and the entire process and living experience and tenancy will go smoother overall. Tip number 6, keep solid records. You want to make sure that you document everything from the first time you meet a potential tenant to the entire screening process and any communication with the tenant throughout the duration of the lease. You don't want things to go south when it comes to a lease or when it comes to a tenant. Communication with your tenant is via email, not text message. A lot of states don't allow text messages as admissible evidence in a court. So you want to make sure that you're documenting your evidence via email or certified mail through the post office. I gotta get out of here. I think I'm wrapping up. So let's head on to the street. We'll cover the rest of the tips out there. Tip number 7, security deposits. I know security deposits might be good to have if in case one of your tenants destroys your place and you have to go after it, but you need to make sure that you're accounting for it properly. You need to make sure that you're depositing it into the correct account. After all, security deposits are your tenant's money until it's returned or used. So you need to research your state's local landlord tenant security deposit laws, making sure that you're depositing it into potentially an interest-bearing account, making sure that you're sending your tenant receipts every month. So you need to make sure that you are keeping track of security deposits and you're accounting for it the correct way. Tip number 8, don't let your tenant make their own repairs. It may be good in the moment, but you want to make sure that any repairs that are made to your property are done by a professional. Make sure that they're licensed, make sure that they're potentially pulling the proper permits if they need to, and making sure that the work is warrantable. You don't want your tenant just making unnecessary repairs that could cause issues down the line, could cause insurance claims down the line. It's just not good practice. So you want to make sure that any issues that arise, you're taking care of them yourself or you're hiring a professional to take care of them for you. Which is a good segue into tip number 9, making sure that you're surrounding yourself with a good team. You want to make sure that you have good subcontractors, contractors, property managers, attorneys, all of the above when you are buying a rental property or running a rental property. If anything comes up, you want to make sure that you can easily pick up the phone, make a call, have someone on site ASAP to fix something or bounce an idea off of someone. If you have a legal question, if you have a tax question, making sure that you assemble the right team is super important when owning rental property. The 10th and final tip I want to talk about is making sure that you run your rental property like a business. This isn't a hobby, it's a business. And making sure that you're running it like a business is very important. You want to make sure that you have the correct entities set up from a legal standpoint, the correct bank accounts, you're not commingling funds. Treating a rental property like a business will ultimately make sure that things go smoother, things cash flow better, your relationships with your tenants will be easier, and you'll just have an overall easier experience, and it'll be much easier for you to scale over time when you establish the correct processes and procedures when owning rental property. So that being said, those are my top 10 tips for owning a rental property or investment property. If you have any questions on any of the tips, hit me up in the comments below. Let me know what you think. If you've liked the video, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell notification for future content. We'll see you in the next video.